They thought time would bury their sins, that blood would fade, families would forget, and dusty files would stay locked forever. But the dead don't stay quiet. A single strand of hair sealed since 1979, a fingerprint, smudged but waiting, a child's bicycle, abandoned in the rain. For decades, these clues were ghosts trapped in files. Then DNA met artificial intelligence, turning silence into evidence, building family trees, sketching faces out of code, and unmasking killers who thought they were untouchable. In this video, we count down 10 cold cases finally cracked by AI and DNA. Some are infamous, others you may never have heard before, but all of them prove the same chilling truth. Time no longer protects the guilty. This is Grimvault, where silence shatters and the stories the dark tried to bury are dragged into the light. 10. April Tinsley, 1988. April was just 8 years old when she vanished while walking home on Easter weekend. 3 days later, her body was found in a ditch outside Fort Wayne. The crime was horrifying, but what followed was worse. For 30 years, the killer taunted the community, leaving sickening notes. One stuffed inside a little girl's bicycle basket. Another scrawled across a barn wall, "I kill 8-year-old April." Parents lived in fear. Children grew up under the shadow of a phantom who mocked police and walked free. Detectives chased hundreds of leads. Every one turned to dust.
It's been a roller coaster. You get an individual who gets called in and it looks like it could be a good suspect, and then they're ultimately ruled out.
Then came AI-driven genealogy. April's DNA was uploaded into a digital database. From a single genetic thread, a family tree began to branch until it pointed to one man, John D. Miller. Detectives pulled DNA from his trash. The match was undeniable. When they knocked on his door in 2018, Miller didn't resist. He simply said, "I knew you were coming." He was sentenced to 80 years. For April's mother, hearing her daughter's name spoken in court after 3 decades of silence was the closest thing to justice she would ever have. The killer tried to carve the last word on a barn wall, but in the end, the final word belonged to April's family. Here's something for you. If a killer had taunted your community for 30 years, would people have stayed silent or taken justice into their own hands? Drop your take in the comments. 9. The Golden State Killer, carried from 1974 to 1986. He stalked couples in California suburbs, slipping through sliding glass doors and whispering threats while families lay bound in the dark. For 40 years, detectives carried binders of his attacks. 13 murders, 50 assaults, yet his name was always out of reach. Some called him a phantom. Others called him policing's greatest failure. Then, in 2018, a new tool was tested. AI-assisted genealogy. Crime scene DNA was uploaded into a public database. What came back wasn't a name, but a sprawling digital family tree. Cousins, uncles, generations deep. Detectives worked backward, pruning the branches until one man remained, a retired cop, Joseph D'Angelo. Neighbors described him as quiet, ordinary, but his DNA proved he was the ghost that had terrorized California. In 2020, D'Angelo shuffled into court, frail and silent. Survivors faced him, some trembling, some defiant. When the guilty plea was spoken, the decades-long silence cracked. AI had pulled a monster out of history, and with that, the dam broke. 8. Christy Myrick, Pennsylvania, 1992. Christy was a young teacher, beloved by her students. On the morning of December 21st, she laid out lesson plans for her classroom's holiday party. She never made it. Hours later, her body was found in her home, brutally beaten and strangled. For 26 years, investigators hit dead ends. They tested DNA, they re-interviewed neighbors. Each December, the same haunting thought returned. A classroom once waited for a teacher who never arrived. Then, in 2018, AI-assisted genealogy opened a new path. The DNA pointed not to a stranger, but to someone hiding in plain sight, a well-known DJ, Raymond Rowe. To the community, He was the man who played weddings and charity events, the face on every dance floor. To investigators, he was the ghost behind a classroom tragedy. When Rowe confessed, parents who had once trusted him with their children sat in court, stunned.
52-year-old Raymond Rowe is asking for a new trial. He took to the stand in court yesterday.
In 2019, he was sentenced to life. Christie's desk stayed empty for 26 years, but at last, AI filled it with an answer. 7. Angie Dodge, Idaho, 1996. 19-year-old Angie Dodge was found murdered in her Idaho Falls apartment. The evidence was everywhere, but the investigation went horribly wrong. Detectives pressured a young man, Christopher Tapp, into a false confession. For 20 years, he lived branded as a killer, even though the DNA never matched.
A quote, new beginning. Now this comes after Tapp spent more than 2 decades in prison after he was convicted. In 2017, investigators found that DNA results from the original crime scene did not match Tapp's.
Through it all, Angie's mother, Carol, never stopped fighting. She returned to court again and again, begging investigators to look closer. She said her daughter's spirit could not rest while the truth stayed buried. Finally, in 2019, AI genealogy pointed to Brian Dripps. Detectives tailed him, collected a discarded cigarette, and the DNA sealed it. Dripps confessed and admitted Tapp had nothing to do with the crime. Dripps walked free after 2 stolen decades. Dripps was sentenced to life. Carol wept as her fight was finally vindicated, her daughter's real killer finally named. This case revealed something extraordinary. AI doesn't just catch the guilty, sometimes it rescues the innocent.
It's amazing, there's wrongful convictions every day that, happen through the country and even here locally, and it's an amazing thing that programs like this are here.
AI cracked this case wide open, but should an algorithm really hold this much power over justice? We'd love to hear your take below. Before we continue, a quick thank you. Grim Vault just passed 500 subscribers, thanks to you. The next stop is 1,000. Help us get there. Subscribe now and you'll never miss the next case. Every week, a new case. Darker, stranger, and more unforgettable than the last. Now, back to the countdown. 6. Lindy Sue Beechler, Pennsylvania, 1975. Christmas season, 1975. Lindy Sue was 19, newly married, wrapping gifts in her Lancaster apartment. Hours later, her husband returned to find her stabbed to death, the wrapping paper still scattered around her. The case froze for nearly 50 years. Investigators kept her photo on their desks, calling it a wound that never healed. Each anniversary, carrying questions too heavy to set down. In 2022, AI genealogy reawakened the file. The DNA pointed to someone shocking, David Sinopoli, a neighbor who had lived quietly in the same community for decades. Police pulled his DNA from a discarded coffee cup, and it matched. In 2023, Sinopoli pled guilty. Nearly 50 years late, justice arrived.
The preliminary hearing for David Sinopoli is set for today. He was arrested back in July at his home in East Hempfield Township after police say he stabbed 19-year-old Lindy Sue Beechler to death.
For Lindy Sue's family, it was proof that even half a century cannot erase the truth. The Christmas gifts stayed unopened, but the silence that haunted her family was finally unwrapped. 5. Christine Franke, Florida, 2001. Christine was a college student in Orlando, balancing classes, friends, and part-time work. Her mother described her as vibrant, someone who lit up rooms with her laugh. One evening, she was found murdered in her apartment. The door had been left unlocked. She never had the chance to finish her degree. Detectives chased every lead they could. The DNA profile was strong, but without a name, it was like a voice speaking in the dark. For years, her mother visited Christine's grave, asking the same question. Who did this? In 2018, Parabon's AI genealogy gave that voice a face. The trail led to Benjamin Holmes. Detectives followed him carefully, waiting for a mistake. When he tossed a cigarette onto the ground, they had what they needed. DNA from the cigarette matched the crime scene exactly. In 2023, Holmes was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Christine's mother finally stood in court, hearing the truth she had begged for since 2001.
Just having it settled in our minds and knowing that he's behind bars and can't hurt anybody else.
Her Her textbooks remained unfinished, but her story, after 2 decades of silence, finally had an ending, written by AI. 4. The Phoenix Canal Murders. Canal Murders, Arizona, from 1992 to 1993. Angela Brosso was just 22, riding her bike along the Arizona Canal. Days later, her body was found in pieces. Less than a year later, 17-year-old Melanie Bernas was discovered in the same area, her life stolen in the same brutal way. The murders terrified Phoenix. The city whispered about a monster hunting its streets. For decades, detectives held DNA evidence in their hands, but without a name, it was powerless. Families aged, parents died waiting, officers retired, haunted by the unsolved cruelty. Then came AI genealogy. The DNA was run through algorithms and the family trees began to take shape. The trail led to Brian Patrick Miller, a man known publicly as the Zombie Hunter. He dressed in gory costumes, posed with police vehicles, and was even a familiar face at parades. He had been hiding in plain sight. The DNA confirmed what the city feared. Miller was the Canal Killer. In 2023, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For years, Phoenix feared a faceless ghost. AI didn't just reveal his name, it tore off his mask. 3. Michella Welch, Washington, 1986. 12-year-old Michella was babysitting her younger sisters in a Tacoma park. She left for just a moment, riding her bike to buy sandwiches from a deli nearby. When her sisters returned, the bike was still there, but Michella was gone. Hours later, her body was discovered in nearby woods. For 36 years, the case remained unsolved. Every birthday, every Christmas, her sisters carried the memory of that day. Detectives spoke of Michella often, the little girl whose smile had become a wound in Tacoma's history. In 2018, AI genealogy finally broke the silence. The profile led to Gary Hartman, a nurse living an ordinary life in the same city. Investigators watched, waited, and collected DNA from a napkin he had used. It matched perfectly. In 2022, Hartman was sentenced to more than 20 years. In court, Michella's sisters sat together, their faces heavy with both relief and grief.
I am thankful to say, through God's strength, that I choose to forgive Gary Hartman, because when I do not, it brings death to my life in one way or another.
The bicycle had waited in the park for hours. Decades later, AI explained why she never came back to ride it home. 2. Deborah Dalzell, 1999. Deborah was a successful attorney in Sarasota. She was found murdered in her home. Her life ended violently and without warning. For 20 years, her case lingered in silence. In 2019, Parabon's AI introduced something different: DNA phenotyping. From a genetic sample, it built a ghostly face, the digital outline of a killer no one could see. That image reawakened the case, giving detectives a face to chase.
You're going to hear that there is a complete DNA profile obtained, or the genetic fingerprints of Deborah's killer.
Then genealogy narrowed the list further. One man stood out, Luke Fleming. Detectives tracked him, obtained his DNA, and the match was exact. In 2020, Fleming was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For the first time, AI hadn't just traced a bloodline, it had created a face and led detectives to the man behind it. Deborah had spent her career arguing cases in court. 2 decades later, technology argued hers, and finally won. 1. Michelle Martinko, Iowa, 1979. 2 days before Christmas, 18-year-old Michelle Martinko went shopping for a winter coat at a Cedar Rapids mall. She never made it home. Hours later, her body was found in her car, parked outside the mall. She had been stabbed again and again. For 40 years, her case became one of Iowa's most haunting mysteries. Her classmates grew older, always with an empty seat at reunions. Her parents died without answers. Detectives spoke of Michelle as a promise they had failed to keep. Then came AI genealogy. The DNA, untouched for decades, was run through algorithms that built family trees, leading to an ordinary man named Jerry Burns. Investigators followed him to a restaurant, collected a straw he'd left behind, and tested it. The DNA was a perfect match.
The collected DNA was a match to the DNA from the blood that was found on Michelle's clothing.
In 2020, Burns was convicted and sentenced to life. The courtroom was filled with Michelle's former classmates, now gray-hailed, carrying the weight of her memory into the present. For 40 years, her smile was frozen in a yearbook photo. AI finally unfroze it, giving Michelle the justice she had been denied for half a lifetime. AI has turned silence into evidence and ghosts into names. But with every case solved, a darker question lingers. How many more killers are still hiding in family trees, waiting for the algorithm to speak their names? The files may close, but the silence they leave behind is never solved. If you want these stories to keep coming, subscribe to Grim Vault. Every like, every comment, every share keeps this channel alive and brings more forgotten cases back into the light. So tell us, which case in this countdown unsettled you the most? And if there's another you want us to cover, drop it in the comments. Your suggestion might become the next story we unearth. Until next time, remember, some doors, once opened, never close again.